Every system collapse creates winners, but it also creates losers. And the losers are never random. They are predictable. They are consistent. And across history, they're almost always the same groups, regardless of country, culture, or era. The mistake people make is believing collapse hurts everyone equally. It doesn't. Collapse sorts people. It separates them. And the sorting begins long before most people realize anything is wrong. The first people to lose in a collapsing system are not the poorest. They are the most dependent. Dependence is invisible when systems work. It looks like stability, routine, normal life, but dependence becomes a liability the moment systems stop functioning smoothly. People who rely on fixed rules, fixed income, fixed access, and fixed guarantees are the first to feel pressure, not because they did something wrong, but because rigidity breaks before flexibility. And when systems fail, predictability disappears, and those whose survival depends on predictability suffer first. The second group to lose are those who trust institutions more than incentives. They believe rules will be enforced fairly. They believe protections will hold. They believe authorities will act in the public interest. They wait. Waiting is catastrophic during collapse, because collapse is not announced. There is no bell, no official statement that says the system no longer works. Instead, there are delays, contradictions, temporary measures. People who trust institutions interpret these signals as problems being solved. They assume stability will return, so they do nothing. And while they wait, conditions change beneath them. By the time reality becomes undeniable, options have narrowed. The third group to lose are those whose value exists only inside the system. Their skills, their credentials, their status, their identity. When systems function, credentials are currency, titles matter, certifications open doors, reputation carries weight. But when systems collapse, symbolic value evaporates. What mattered yesterday stops mattering today. People who invested their entire lives into system-approved value find themselves holding assets no one wants. Their skills are real. Their effort was genuine. But the system that recognized them no longer exists in the same form. And without recognition, value collapses. This is one of the most painful losses, because it is not financial alone, it is existential. The fourth group to lose are those who mistake legality for safety. When systems weaken, laws become uneven. They still exist. They're just no longer applied consistently. People who assume legal means protected are exposed first, because collapse turns legality into a suggestion, not a shield. Enforcement becomes selective. Exceptions multiply. Rules bend. Those who don't know how to navigate exceptions fall through cracks. They did everything right. They followed the rules, and they are punished for it. Not intentionally, structurally. The fifth group to lose are those emotionally attached to fairness. Fairness is a luxury of stable systems. Collapse does not care about fairness. It cares about pressure. People who believe things should work a certain way argue instead of adapting. They protest. They debate. They demand accountability. But collapse does not respond to moral arguments. It responds to leverage. While some people fight for justice, others reposition quietly. And by the time fairness becomes impossible to enforce, the fight is already lost. The sixth group to lose are those who confuse optimism with resilience. Optimism tells people things will get better. Resilience prepares people for things getting worse. Optimists wait for recovery. Resilient people adjust early. During collapse, optimism delays action. It encourages people to hold on too long, to stay put, to assume reversal is inevitable. Resilience accepts uncertainty, and acceptance leads to movement. Those who cling to optimism lose time. Time is the most valuable asset during collapse. The seventh group to lose are those who need consensus before acting. When systems function, consensus is virtuous. When systems collapse, consensus is paralysis. People who wait for agreement miss windows. They wait for clarity. They wait for confirmation. They wait for permission. But collapse does not offer permission. It punishes hesitation. Those who act independently, even imperfectly, outperform those who wait for alignment. The eighth group to lose are those trapped in linear thinking. They assume tomorrow will resemble today, that disruptions are temporary, that patterns don't repeat. Collapse breaks linear timelines. It compresses consequences. Events stack. Decisions cascade. People who expect gradual change are overwhelmed by non-linear shifts. They react too late. They underestimate speed, and speed decides outcomes. The ninth group to lose are those who cannot imagine life outside the system. Their identity, their routine, their self-worth. Everything is tied to the system's structure. When that structure weakens, they freeze, they cling, they deny. They can't detach psychologically, so they can't adapt practically. Collapse punishes psychological rigidity more than economic weakness. The 10th group to lose are those who assume collapse will look dramatic. They expect sirens, announcements, a clear breaking point. But collapse usually looks boring, administrative, confusing. By the time it feels dramatic, damage is already done. Those waiting for obvious signs miss the real transition because the most important losses happen quietly, in access, in opportunity, in optionality, before panic ever sets in. This is why collapse feels unfair, because by the time most people realize what's happening, the first round of losses has already occurred. Not violently, silently. And once you lose early, recovery becomes exponentially harder, because collapse compounds disadvantage. Early losers lose access. Loss of access leads to dependency. Dependency leads to constraint. Constraint leads to compliance. And compliance locks people into outcomes they never chose. This is how collapse creates long-term inequality. Not through destruction, through sorting. And the sorting always starts with the same people. Those who trusted stability. Those who waited. Those who followed rules. Those who believed fairness would protect them. Those who assumed tomorrow would look like yesterday. They lose first. Not because they are weak, but because the system trained them to be dependent on it. Once the first group falls, collapse accelerates. Not because the system suddenly breaks faster, but because loss compounds. Early loss removes options, and without options, people are forced into decisions they would never have chosen voluntarily. This is where collapse becomes irreversible for many. The next group to lose is the middle, not immediately, gradually. The middle always believes it is insulated, too established to fall quickly, too stable to be vulnerable, too necessary to be ignored. But the middle depends more on systems than any other group. The poor already live with uncertainty. The powerful shape uncertainty. The middle survives by predictability, predictable income, predictable access, predictable rules, predictable progression. When systems collapse, predictability is the first casualty. And when predictability disappears, the middle has nothing to fall back on. The middle holds assets that only have value inside the system. Careers, credentials, pensions, long-term promises. These are not tangible in collapse. They cannot be exchanged. They cannot be defended. They cannot be enforced. So the middle doesn't collapse instantly. It erodes, slowly, one downgrade at a time, one lost benefit, one delayed payment, one exception denied. Until suddenly, the middle realizes it is no longer in the middle, but by then, it's too late to move. The next group to lose are those who try to maintain appearances. They spend resources trying to preserve normalcy. They keep paying for lifestyles designed for a system that no longer exists. They cling to status. They maintain obligations. They refuse to downshift early. Collapse punishes pride, because resources spent preserving appearances are resources not spent preserving flexibility. Those who refuse to adjust early lose everything later. The next group to lose are those who believe collapse is temporary. They assume a rebound, a correction, a return to normal. So they delay difficult decisions. They hold assets too long. They stay in structures that are failing. They wait for permission to act. Collapse does not reward patience. It rewards timing, and timing is lost when denial sets in. The next group to lose are those who confuse information with understanding. They follow news. They consume analysis. They track updates obsessively. But they don't change behavior. They believe being informed is the same as being prepared. It isn't. Collapse does not punish ignorance as harshly as it punishes inaction. Understanding without adjustment is useless. People who know what's happening but refuse to move are often worse off than those who done to know it all, because they hesitate longer. The next group to lose are those bound by obligations they cannot renegotiate. Debt, contracts, fixed commitments. These obligations were manageable under stable conditions. They become traps during collapse. When income becomes unstable but obligations remain rigid, people are crushed. Collapse does not renegotiate contracts automatically. It enforces them unevenly. Those who cannot restructure early are forced into compliance later. The next group to lose are those who rely on protection instead of leverage. They believe someone will intervene, a regulator, an institution, a safety net. But collapse overwhelms protection systems. Support becomes conditional, delayed, limited. People who rely on protection wait. People with leverage act. Collapse does not reward those who deserve help. It rewards those who don't need it. The next group to lose are those who internalize blame. They assume failure is personal, they work harder, they comply more, they sacrifice further. But collapse is structural. Effort cannot fix broken incentives. People who blame themselves burn out faster. Burnout removes agency, and once agency is gone, outcomes are decided externally. The next group to lose are those who become dependent on emergency measures. Temporary relief becomes permanent reliance. Short-term assistance becomes long-term constraint. Support comes with conditions. Conditions narrow choices. Narrowed choices reduce independence. Collapse turns aid into control mechanisms. Those who cannot exit assistance early become locked into it. The next group to lose are those who mistake adaptation for survival. They adjust just enough to get by. But they don't reposition. They adapt downward instead of sideways. They accept reduced expectations, lower standards, fewer options. This keeps them alive, but trapped. Survival without repositioning becomes stagnation, and stagnation becomes permanent loss. The next group to lose are those who believe collapse ends. They imagine a finish line, a point where things stabilize and life resumes. Collapse does not end cleanly, it transforms. Those waiting for an ending miss the transition, and the transition is where positions are assigned. By the time collapse feels over, roles are fixed, access is limited, hierarchy is set, mobility is reduced. This is when loss becomes permanent. Because the replacement system is already operational, and replacement systems are far less forgiving than collapsing ones. The final group to lose are those who never realize what happened. They adapt just enough to survive. They accept new rules, they adjust expectations, they normalize constraints. They don't feel like they lost, but they did. They lost optionality. They lost leverage. They lost the ability to choose. Their lives continue, but within narrower boundaries. Collapse doesn't always look like ruin. Sometimes it looks like permanent limitation, and limitation is harder to notice than destruction. This is why collapse is so devastating. Not because it kills, but because it sorts, and once sorted, movement becomes difficult. The people who lose first rarely recover, because collapse doesn't just remove resources. It removes paths back. Early loss reduces access. Reduced access limits choices. Limited choices enforce compliance. Compliance locks in outcomes, and those outcomes harden over time. This is why history repeats the same pattern. The same groups lose first, the same groups struggle most, the same groups disappear from influence, not because they are inferior, but because the system trained them to depend on stability. Collapse is merciless to those trained to trust it. Understanding this doesn't make collapse inevitable, but it changes how you move. It changes what you prioritize. It changes when you act. Because collapse does not announce itself. It reveals itself through who starts losing quietly. And once you know who loses first, you can see collapse long before it becomes obvious.